Hey Israel, how are you?
I'm good, Abby. Thanks so much for having me here.
I'm very happy to talk to you. I like you a lot, Israel. You're a good friend. You're a mental health professional, and you have a lot of other skills too. And you know about survival. You're just a really interesting, well-rounded, very intelligent person. And you even took the course that we gave in psychological first aid. And we had this terrible terror attack on Monday. Today's Friday, so it's a few days later. We had two terrorist Palestinian gunmen show up at an extremely busy bus stop with hundreds of people, dozens of cars, 10:15 in the morning, Monday morning, and open fire with a gun. And they killed six people. They wounded at least 10, and they caused dozens of people to be transported to the hospital with very powerful acute trauma. And I went to this event as a first responder. I was on scene. And I can tell you that this is not the first event at that exact spot, not the second and not the third. In the same spot, we had a previous shooting, we had a bombing, and we had a stabbing. So unfortunately, we're used to very calamitous events happening at this place. We've had many other terror attacks in the area as well, just not in that exact area. And you and I were speaking on Monday, and Monday was like a really, really crazy day. And I felt it was so valuable for you and I to make the time, get on a video, and have a discussion about what does emergency response look like, and what does a psychological first response look like, and how do they maybe blend and overlap. And I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. And I also made a timeline. I've done this very rarely, but actually throughout the day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I went and recorded a bunch of voice notes to myself, play by play, of all sorts of interesting points of interest that came up, that happened, involved in the emergency response. And then I feeded all of that into ChatGPT. I had it transcribe everything and create a timeline that has 14 entries. So I'm going to use it as chicken scratch notes. It's here on the screen. And I made sure to change all identifying details. So if you see that it's a woman, it may not have been a woman, it may have been a man. If you see it was, I made sure to take out ages and things like this. So hopefully everyone's identity is protected. Without any further ado, let's jump in because it's a rare learning opportunity to have such a big, massive sized event that touched so many people, capture it also from the angle of first responding and also from the angle of psychological first aid and maybe even psychotherapy, and blend it all together and record it all and discuss it. So take it away, do your magic.
So I'll just share what my initial question, the place that I found myself in, like 5, 10 minutes after the terror attack, having found out what happened, I was down the road, 10, 15 minutes away at most. And I, having recently graduated the full PFA course, strongly considered coming and trying to make myself helpful there. But as soon as that thought crossed my mind, I immediately felt my own freeze response come on, and my fear was, and the reason why I ended up choosing not to come, was that I would show up on scene and become either, in the best case scenario, just kind of frozen and need a lot of direction, and worst case scenario, become one of the trauma victims myself by walking into such a traumatic scene, having not done it before. So I reached out to you later that day because I was interested in hearing your perspective, and I'm excited that you're turning this into a teaching opportunity to walk through it in a thorough way instead of just giving me a quick answer, of what does a scene like that actually look like when you actually show up to it? How do you prepare yourself in advance to not become a trauma victim and to not freeze? When you do show up, how do you monitor your own state and do enough self-care to make sure that you continue to be among the helpers and not among those needing help, and things of that sort.
Okay, those are all amazing on-point questions, and there's so many of them. I'm not even sure which one to begin with. Which one should we begin with, Yisrael?
I guess the most basic question is just the question of how do I assess when I'm considering walking onto a scene, whether I'm going to be an asset or a liability when I have my own fight flight kind of response as I'm walking in.
Okay. Okay, great question. And I'll tell the people listening to this video, I'll remind you that the first time I ever went to a pediatric CPR, not the first time I did PFA, but the first time I ever went to a highly traumatic event where there was, a body of a baby and, things like this. I remember that my adrenaline was very, very high. I was very nervous and I wasn't thinking clear-headed. And I started praying for the baby because on the radio they said that the baby was in CPR. And then I found a terrible feeling in my gut that by praying, I'm making myself identify too closely with the victim. I'm invested emotionally too much in this, and then I'm not going to be able to help out. And so I'm just mentioning that little snippet of information. And so when I was going on that scene a decade ago, I immediately stopped myself from praying, said, this is not my tragedy. I'm not going to be emotionally invested in this right now. I can be empathic, I could be kind, but I need to have a distance. I need to operate from a space that I'm able to, like Yisrael, like you said, to be an asset and not a liability. Similarly, by the way, when a first responder like an EMT or police officer, which I'm both of those, when we respond to an emergency, when we run up 7 flights of stairs to give oxygen to a person who's having chest pains, and we're going, and we can't breathe, then we're not helpful to anyone. And so a lot of times when we're walking to a scene instead of running, people say, quick, come, you got to go fast. And they have complaints, and maybe they'll take a video of us and they'll put it on social media and they'll say, why are they not running? But the answer is because I'm lugging a bag of gear, 7 flights of stairs. I'm busy thinking about what this person might have and what treatment I'm going to give him and what report I'm going to give to the radio. And so there's just so much that we're in the middle of doing. And I have to add on top of this, there's also the driving angle of emergency response. So we're busy getting an address. We're trying to figure out where it is. We're trying to figure out where to throw our car. And there's a whole discussion just there because also if you would have shown onto the scene at the Ramot Junction, or if I'm showing up to a heart attack, if we throw our car somewhere haphazardly and now it blocks ambulances and fire trucks and police officers from pulling up to the scene, we've done a great disservice with our car. So when we talk about being a asset and not a liability, it's from our car and it's from our skills and it's from our emotional stance. And I'll say another thing because I'm just kind of freely associating with you right now, and I think it's a good thing. I have a friend who's a veteran first responder, many, many years, super experienced guy. And one of the things he likes to say on our topic is when he wears the uniform of a first responder, which people that do PFA don't have, by the way, or typically don't have, some of them do. Maybe one day when I am done, we're setting up an organization now. I didn't speak about it with too many people, but maybe when that's set up, we'll give out some sort of vest or something like this. But my friend who's a veteran first responder says he puts on a vest, he goes onto a scene, and he imagines that this vest protects him from trauma, whether it's direct trauma, vicarious trauma. And then when he gets off the scene, he takes off the vest, he leaves it in his car. And to him, this is his conscious ritual where he's leaving the tragedy behind. And then he walks into his house. This is also a very common thing that we have in the decompression state. Just like divers that they go into a submarine, or they go from the submarine out into the water. And, there's different changes of pressure, and there's this chamber that you have to stand in the middle to kind of go through this journey from point A to point C. You have to go through point B. It's the same thing with PFA providers and first responders. And what happens is we come home after a shooting or after a pediatric CPR, and we just saw blood, gore, guts, crying, yelling, hysteria, dissociation, confusion, and your wife wants you to give showers to the kids. So it's like, what does A and C have to do with each other? And so there's a discussion we're not going to go into now because we're time bound today. But there's that discussion of what are the rituals, best practices of transitioning. And obviously part of that is going to be taking a pause. And we're pausing on the way to an event if we have the privilege to. We don't always have that privilege. And we're pausing on the way back from an event too. And then there's the rituals that we're going to have in order to make that transition. So for me, for example, when I sit and play with my kids after I see shot up bodies, that's a good thing for me. Whenever I personally tap into the neutrality of the world and I see a mom shopping groceries for her family, for me personally, that's healing, because I say, the world is still going. My cognitive distortion wants to say that the whole world is bad, the whole world is coming to an end, and everybody died. But then I see a mom, putting bananas in a basket. So apparently everyone's, not everyone's dead. There's some kids waiting to eat some bananas. Not everyone's the same in this. Everyone has to learn what works for them. Study on the internet best practices, and we can give a whole workshop on it at a different time. And of course, there are bad practices where first responders, they drink alcohol, they smoke marijuana, and what they're doing is avoidance. They're not processing their feelings, they're suppressing the feelings, and then the feelings come back later on, and they don't have a toolkit for how to deal with emotions. And you're nodding your head because you're a rising star therapist, and I'm really proud of your journey, by the way, seeing you and your career really growing, and it's amazing to see. I could tell you that on Monday, I had a ton of emotions, and I did not have the time to process them. And I knew about this, and I was on top of it, and I'm a seasoned expert in this area, and I was looking for opportunities to kind of get it out, which is not why I'm doing this today, although it might help, I don't know. But that's why, as we'll see later on in the timeline, when I got home, I made some videos of myself. I put it on my WhatsApp status. I shared it with some of my viewers. I have a few hundred friends and viewers there. And to me, that's kind of like how I got it out. And I also left different voice notes throughout the day because the day was so surreal that I couldn't even imagine that it was happening because I was so busy. So kind of like I heard my own voice notes again. I thought about what happened, and it was very good. So that was a mouthful. I think that answers part of your question.
Can I pick up on something that you said there?
Go.
You made some comment about that we don't always have the privilege, we don't always have the bandwidth, the time, the context to take the pause on the way into the scene. And that I think is exactly the moment where, in my mind, the assessment of am I going to be an asset or a liability is the most crucial. Because if I have a moment to collect myself and I can walk into the scene relatively regulated, I can walk into the scene with a sense of proportion, with a sense of time, with a sense of my role, with the sense that this is not happening to me, it's happening to somebody else. A lot of these kind of cognitive interventions, which can be very helpful in gaining space and in not feeling more overwhelmed than necessary. But when I'm bolting up the steps because there's a person who's stopped breathing 3 minutes ago, how do I figure out when I have no time even to stop and calm myself? Am I actually going to be helpful walking into this scene?
There's a phrase that first responders who are old and wise, they say, walk, don't run. And it's a general stance when we're running to emergency that, as far as we can tell, and there are studies on this, racing as fast as you can like a maniac to help somebody, whether it's psychologically or with oxygen, it's true that you might save, 0.9 seconds, but you usually pay a much bigger price. This is also true if you ever drive a distance of 2 or 3 hours away and you're speeding maybe 30 kilometers over the speed limit, and you kind of expect you'll get to this location half hour early, and you find out that you shaved off like 2 minutes. So it ends up really just hurting a lot of people. I've been a first responder at scenes where I've seen first responders run to places and hit people along the way. I spoke to a police officer who she was driving to the Versailles building collapse in Israel, which was one of Israel's most devastating civil disasters. And that was where like a wedding hall was illegally built on top of another floor, and it caved in the middle of the dancing, and we had dozens of killed and wounded. And she was driving to that event as fast as she can, and she ran over a child. And the reason I could say this is because she talks about this in public, so I'm not so worried about giving her details because she's public about it. But walk, don't run. That's the name of the game. And also, as far as experience, the more experience we have and exposure that we have to complex things and unfamiliar things, then the more mastery we create over those things. And arguably, by definition, that's how we would define resilience from a very technical standpoint. Resilience to some people sounds like a very spiritual thing and a very good feel thing. But if you just look at what are the components of resilience, like what are the pieces, it's taking something that is complex and has many moving parts. Maybe they don't even seem congruent together in some way. And it's putting them all together, and it's studying those, looking at those, and creating a sense of mastery until you can kind of contain them all and blend them all in a effective way that you can then use in some applied manner in this world, right? There's this guy, a Green Beret named Mike Glover, and he has a book, I think it's called Prepared. And in that book, he captures this in a very nice way. He's not a therapist, he's a Green Beret, but he got onto this very well. It's really unpacking something complex and gaining familiarity with it until you achieve mastery. And I really like that definition a lot. I think it's a very practical one. And so it's going to involve, in your question, showing up at these scenes, seeing what they're like, feeling what they're like, doing your best, getting supervision, trying again, and you'll create mastery. Just like a first responder, first day on the job, is going to mess up. Police officer is going to mess up. And as we might see later on in the timeline when we get to it, we will hear reports from first responders that this was their first big critical incident and they messed up. A bunch of them did. And there's no blame in that, by the way. There's no blame. Their nervous system did not allow them to perform properly. And so that's fine. And we'll talk about maybe later what somebody told them in a debriefing. But of course, they're just going to have to go out more, and they're going to have to achieve mastery. And I can tell you one more thing on this is that a lot of what I deal with also is first responder trauma, duty-induced trauma. And I can tell you there's a lot of first responders out there that are in deep duty-induced trauma with a lot of shame and a lot of guilt because they don't understand how their bodies work. And they say, I went to this critical incident and I shut down, and this proves that I don't belong here. And even if I was in the fire department for 10 years, well, I was never at this sort of event. And so, it really shows my true colors and I don't belong here. So I'm going to give back my gear. I'm going to hang my head in shame. I'm going to leave back the whole culture, all my friends. I'm going to leave back the identity because first responding has a very strong identity to it. and I'm just going to work in a burger place, which it's not bad to work in a burger place. Don't get me wrong. It's not what I'm saying, but they're leaving the profession and judging themselves for the rest of their life. And all they needed was a little bit of peer support or a little bit of PFA, which is two different things, by the way, but sometimes it could be the same, and say, hey, let's talk about what happened. And then give them a new perspective and say, maybe what happened was your body froze up, you dissociated, you were filled with adrenaline, and maybe that's okay. And maybe what it shows is you just need some more stress inoculation training, which I also teach. You need some more exposure to these insane levels of calls. Maybe you want to find more opportunities somehow to expose yourself. You want some more supervision, but you're a good guy and you do good things. And it doesn't reflect that you're broken, bad, and incapable. That was a mouthful.
Great. Not to pat myself on the back for no reason, but I'm feeling sort of, I think, in a good way about the fact that I didn't end up going on Monday to the scene of the attack. In the moment, I really tried to figure out how am I reacting and am I prepared to walk into this level of trauma as my first PFA scene. And I don't feel that I failed in some way by choosing not to show up. I mean, I'd be interested to hear your feedback, but some of the main things that I was considering as I made that decision, or I would say probably the biggest thing that gave me permission not to go was the fact that this was going to be attended by loads and loads of first responders who have lots more experience than me. It didn't feel like I was the closest person to the event. I was the only person who was going to get there. Like there was some critical need that if I wasn't going to fill it, something tragic would happen. It was more a question of, do I have what to contribute, or am I going to get in the way? And I definitely do wish that I had been more like ready to go and been prepared for it psychologically so that I could show up and be helpful. But I'm also very aware of my limitations. I do recognize that my lack of experience with this makes me more likely to be a liability than an asset in a mass casualty incident of this scale. And the reason why I reached out to you and wanted to have some level of conversation is exactly because I'm hoping that hearing you go through the timeline, for example, will help me to, that will be a level of stress inoculation of being able to have more of a realistic picture of what do these nightmare scenes look like. I think the uncertainty of having no idea what it would be like is one of the biggest factors of why it was too difficult for me to make the decision, yes, I should go.
Okay. So first of all, if you calculated that and that was what you decided at the time and you feel good about it, then that's great. That is great. I'm going to encourage you next time to go, but I'm going to fill in some details. So ideally, when we go to scenes like this, we want to go with a partner or we want to join somebody else that's already on scene and work together. That might be somebody you know, and it might be somebody you don't. When I give the 16-hour course, sometimes it's to organizations, and we're helping them set up a crisis team. And so they're going to dispatch a team of 2 people, 4 people, 6 people to a scene, and then they'll work in groups, and they'll divvy up the work and support one another. And that's very powerful because you feel that you're not alone. Professionally, you can consult with the person next to you. Technically, there's more hands to get the work done. So from an emotional level to a technical and professional level, that's really the best practice. Now, if you learned in a course as a Lone Ranger, I would say that you can still show up to a scene and you can find somebody else that's doing this work. And it might be a first responder who has minimal training. Right? He took a 1-hour workshop. And it might be a therapist who thinks they know what they're doing and have no idea. And unfortunately, that's usually the case. And it might be somebody who's highly trained and highly experienced. And in any of those cases, you can tag onto them and say, I'm a therapist, I'm trained in this, And I'm also in touch with, an expert. I can ask them questions. I want to help this person. Is it okay if I approach them? And I would say just jump in. The reason why that's okay to do is because when you have a big chaotic scene of such a large scale, I can almost guarantee you there's going to be a need for you. People come out of the woodwork very slowly over a long amount of time. I remember when I went to the Sarona, Tel Aviv shooting attack, which was similar in a way because it was two terrorists with similar weapons, actually, and they blended into the civilian population, opened up in the Max Brenner restaurant in Tel Aviv. Anyhow, I don't live in Tel Aviv. I live in Jerusalem, and I remember rushing to the scene from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv with a friend of mine, a doctor who was highly trained in PFA, a great friend of mine. He actually is also my police partner. And so we were driving there, and it took us about 45 minutes with lights and sirens to get on scene. And, we're first responders, so we can kind of get privilege and kind of go through different roadblocks. And until we got inside, and there were people to work with even an hour later when we settled and we were walking on scene, including a highly dissociative man who I sometimes talk about in my courses. And, there was another girl who was very traumatized as well. She was highly agitated. So there were people to help. And the reason why that makes sense is because when there's a shooting attack, people run for their lives and they hide. And so they might jump into a dumpster. They might run into a random person's house and lock the door without permission. They'll run into a car and, jump in the trunk. I was at a debriefing because of this event Tuesday night. No, it was Monday night. And there was a guy at the Merkaz Harav shooting where there was a single shooter at that attack. And he said he found somebody who was hiding and stuck behind a bookcase 6 hours after the attack. And the guy was shot. So I would say, yes, there will be a lot of people on scene, but a lot less people are going to, they're going to clear out. But then people are going to come out of the woodworks. There was a story in this remote shooting this week where a girl ran from the scene to the remote mall and hid in the bathroom. And then 3 or 4 hours later came out and was seeking psychological help. And she eventually came to a sort of field hospital that we set up and she got an intervention. So this stuff happens.
What you're saying is making me wonder if something that maybe I could have done differently on Monday is let myself stay off scene for the first little while when I would expect that most of the medical trauma was still going on, and that it would be the most difficult for me to keep myself together being present, but then to choose an hour later, 2 hours later, whenever it is that I could feel calm and also could expect that probably most of the serious medical trauma had been moved off site, that then there would still be work to do and I could make myself helpful when things had calmed down a little bit, but there was still a need.
Well, it's hard to know how to calculate that exactly because people who are wounded are going to be transported very fast in a reasonably well-equipped area. So if we're very down south or very up north and there's no hospital and a very thin ambulance service, so then maybe not. But in that location where this attack happened, first responders got there extremely fast. Wounded were transported extremely fast. But when you talk about bodies remain on scene because where are you taking them to? It depends. Sometimes it's a person that's maybe technically alive by the legal definition and you're required to do CPR, even though it's a traumatic arrest. And so maybe they'll still throw him in an ambulance and take him to a hospital and do CPR and call it in the hospital. And sometimes they do that in order to make a family feel like, we tried. But there's going to be a lot of times bodies on scene covered with emergency blankets. There's going to be blood and gore. And that's going to be there until the police allow it to be removed, until Zaka or an organization that's like a undertaker emergency organization is able to transport the body and bring it to the morgue. There's a lot of parts that go to this, and until they clean up the blood, that can take many hours, and it's a crime scene. So a lot of times they're not allowed to do things until some investigator comes. So what I would tell you is there's an opportunistic moment. The earlier you show up to any event, the more likely you'll have more opportunities to be helpful, obviously. But that doesn't mean you have to go. It doesn't mean you have to feel bad if you didn't go. At the end of the day, this is a choice. You can also go and you can try to determine where can I be useful without being exposed to terrible scenes. And that's fine.
Right.
And if you would have called me on Monday and said, Avi, I don't want to see anything. It's 5 p.m. Is there a place that could be useful? Then at 5 p.m., I might have said, there's a field hospital here. People are walking in and out. Maybe you can be useful. You would have been useful because you would have replaced me and I would have went back to my office. So it really is going to depend. And by the way, don't be afraid to see the bodies in gore if you choose to, not because we should, enjoy that or get, I'm forgetting the word, but some people have a very dark way of like appropriating, getting attention almost out of other people's tragedy. Like, oh, I saw this thing, I was there. So I don't mean in that way, but in the way of, just like any first responder, they acclimate themselves and they become accustomed to seeing hard things. And do they get traumatized and do they get some scratches on their soul? They definitely do. But do they get really good at holding on to that? I think so. I think most people do. So if you choose to do that, no one's requiring you to. But if you choose to, it might be okay to walk right into the lion's den and see the worst of the worst a bunch of times. But I understand, it's your first time and everything. It's okay, really. No judgment. I'll also add one more thing. I remember going to the worst event I ever went to this date, which was a parent that murdered all of their children and then died by suicide. And it was a crime scene. And I was the only one that was allowed on scene. The police did not let somebody else, but I was there with the surviving spouse. This spouse did not know where his children were, what their condition was. He didn't know they were all dead. He didn't know it was all of them, not some of them. He didn't know that the other spouse killed them. He didn't know that they're not alive. He didn't know anything. It was a very hard call for me to be on, and I was not allowed to be with a partner. For my own trauma, I felt like I needed to be with somebody, but I couldn't because there was no permission from the police. And what my colleague did, my police partner, friend who's also a physician, was he waited outside for hours in a car below the building. He said, I'm here with you. And the second you're done, just walk out and we'll talk. And he made sure there was fresh food and he took me home. So just like we offer our presence to somebody else with PFA, he literally did that with me. Maybe it was remotely because he was below and I was above. But these things go a long way and they give us the mental strength to do what we need to confront to help others. So Yisrael, what do you think if we quickly run through the timeline?
Great.
Okay. I'm going to run through it. I'm probably going to talk a lot, which I'm notorious for doing. But please pause me at any point if needed, and then we'll keep going until we get through this. So this is going to be a depiction, play by play, as accurate as I can remember. I recorded this in real time, so I'm going to presume it's pretty accurate. Although trauma does mess up how we, remember things, and I was admittedly very, very busy, but I did record throughout the event. So this is from beginning to end. I was sitting at home after completing some Torah study. So it's a very nonchalant, underwhelming, boring moment. And then on the first responder radio, they said there was a terror attack shooting at the Ramot Junction. And my comment on this is that the worst, craziest moments, like a September 11th moment, it happens out of nowhere, right? And I always say when we're bored to death on police shifts, I always tell my partner as a kind of like encouragement, I say, we're always one moment before the big event. So like, don't worry. Like we shouldn't want a big event, but if we're bored and we're trying to encourage ourselves to stay motivated, like, the big event always happens a moment after the most boring moment. So I got on the radio and I said that I'm en route with protection, because you have to remember when there's a shooting event, it might still be going. And if you go, you might die. So you have to be careful. There's scene safety. You can't just go when there's bullets whizzing with no plan and no training. You might want to wait until the scene is declared safe. In my case, I didn't want to wait because I wanted to shoot the terrorist if that's what's needed, because I'm able to do that. So I got on the radio. I said that I have a ballistic vest and I'm on the way. I went to the closet in my house. I put on a ballistic vest. I have a ballistic vest also in my house and also in the office. So no matter where I am, I have a way to respond to these calls. And I actually went to calls from both places before. So now when you're driving, there's a lot of things you have to think about, because you don't know if the shooting is still going. You don't know how many attackers there are. And you don't know the exact location. They might be moving from place to place. You don't know how many people are wounded or killed. You don't know what gear you need. You don't know if it's a mass casualty or if he's going to be put down after shooting one person in the foot. You just don't know. On top of that, you don't know what the traffic is like. And on top of that, you don't know what you're going to do when you arrive there, and you're like playing these mental war games of, if I show up and they're shot in the head, I'll do this. And if they're shot in the foot, I'll do this. So the mind is really occupied with a ton of information. And this is on top of driving en route, maybe turning on a light and siren, weaving through traffic, trying to understand, you show up finally to the scene and you think you'll see the scene, but you just see 15 cars. You don't know exactly where the scene is. You just see a big hodgepodge mosh pit of cars and people. So even then you have to find out the scene. So it's challenging. So anyways, I was driving towards the scene. The first thing I did en route, after reporting and putting on my vest and putting on the orange hat, which says I'm armed and I'm not a terrorist, for a positive identification, was I got onto a community WhatsApp chat that I manage, and I said, guys, there's a terror attack in this place. Do not go. Stay in your house and be safe. And then the next thing I did was I got onto my security group chat, and I said, guys, there's a terrorist attack at this place. Do not come to the scene. I said to them, do not come to the scene. I know that there's ample people going to the scene. You guys will cover the bases of the neighborhood and keep it safe. So that was all just like on the way before we even got there. And it's a very short trip. And I even managed to call my wife and see if she was okay, because she travels there every day. All that is entry number 1 in the diary of our timeline. So it's like a lot of stuff happening in 5 minutes. We get to the main road, up towards the scene, but not at the scene yet. And there's traffic backed up blocks and blocks. And you have to understand this is also part of these events, because let's take a traffic accident, for example. If there's a bus that turns over at a major junction, which I also went to this week, then how are cars going to get there to respond? So if you have a motorcycle and you're an EMT or a cop, you can respond. But a lot of times you're going to be stuck in a traffic jam, and you're busy now planning how to out-trick the ways and go, different alternative routes. And I got on scene, and this is relevant if you're also a PFA person and you're reporting this to people coming on scene to an event, and you're going to say, I was on the way to this place. It's backed up the wazoo. There's no way to get there. Take this route instead. And that's what I did in this case. Now, when I finally arrived, I got to the scene, but scenes like this are enormous because remember, this is a mass casualty, and we had hundreds of people on scene, hundreds of people involved, and this is no exaggeration. Hundreds of people stand at that bus stop. Dozens of people, if not hundreds, were in the buses and cars on both sides of the major highway that this took place. It's one of the biggest, most expansive areas of a bus stop anywhere that I can think of. And so remember that when this event happened and you go on scene, being on scene can mean anything, and the scene can stretch a kilometer from one end to the other. In this case, because the shooting happened lower towards where you live, they all ran away uphill towards where I live. And so there was dozens of highly traumatized people and wounded people who made it up the hill and walked into the residential neighborhood, which is where I plopped down my car. So I get out of the car and I'm wearing this bulletproof vest, and I have my gun, ammo, and I have this bright orange hat on, and I have my EMT kit and my EMT vest in each hand. And I walk, well, first let's say where I put the car, because this is like a training video, right? I put the car on the side of the road in a way that it will not be disruptive to any sort of, emergency personnel that drive through. And it's not more than 5 seconds that I get out of the car, no exaggeration, and somebody frantically says, "Help, help, come quick." And so I go to this bench, and there's a older woman there who she was highly agitated and she was crying. And I worked with her very briefly. And then I saw there was a woman next to her that was in the same boat. So these two women, who one's older, one's younger, are sitting and crying and kind of just in a daze. And they were communicative because in our course, we talk about when you see somebody who needs PFA, can you talk to them or you can't? And in this case, we could have a conversation with both. And so I did a group intervention. And not only that, I called over another 7 or 8 ladies that were all kind of in this big mosh pit trying to help these 2 ladies. And I said, everybody listen up. I'm going to be saying some important things, and I want you to share it with everyone that you know. And I did basic PFA with the group and basic psychoeducation with the group. I gave them an expectation of what they might be experiencing right now, what they might be experiencing in the days to come, what they might want to do about it, and what resources and assets that they'll have and that they can find now and later as well. The whole thing took maybe 5 minutes. And in 5 minutes, you can do a group intervention for 10 people, and it's very effective. I also made sure that the 2 people who were crying and more agitated were in touch with their loved ones. Their loved ones were on the way to meet them en route. So as far as I was concerned, I'm done. If they were the only victims there in this entire event, then, I would stay with them a lot longer, but there's a lot more to do. And I don't know if there's people bleeding out. I just don't know. So I moved on, and no exaggeration, 10 seconds later, I see a young boy crumpled up, lying in the sun on the sidewalk against the wall. And there's a man standing over him, and I say, "Is he injured? What's going on?" He says, "He's not injured. I checked, but he's very traumatized." And this kid was like really high up there in being agitated, very agitated. We said in our course, Yisrael, that when there's interpersonal violence, so we say that the statistics tell us that people are much more traumatized by these events than by almost any other events, unless it's sexual violence or shooting, things like this. And this is something that you can expect. So he was really.
Can I pause you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Pause you for 1 second, Ami?
Yeah.
Can you just give me a quick sense of time and proximity? The attack happened at 10:15, 10:20.
Mm-hmm.
You're arriving on scene and first helping the agitated women. How many minutes after? Like, what time is it approximately? Do you remember?
6, 7 minutes later.
Okay. And we're talking about a nice distance from the actual scene of the shooting, I believe, if I'm picturing where you're talking about correctly. We're talking like
It's
half a kilometer away, or am I exaggerating?
it's basically running uphill about a block and a half or two,
Okay.
right? You're
So
going up the
you're
highway.
relatively close to the scene.
Yeah. Oh, to where
Okay.
the shooting actually took place. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Although
Part of why I'm wondering that,
there's hundreds of people between me and there and dozens of cars, but yeah.
right. Well, part of why I'm wondering is because you're in a close enough radius to the scene of the shooting that you can probably barely hear yourself think over the sound of all the sirens. You probably hear some degree of human generated chaos coming from down the hill closer to the scene of the attack. Is that's all within range from where you are as you're helping the people that you're starting to describe?
That is exactly what a mass casualty looks like, and especially this type. And there's people swimming in every direction, climbing over each other. There's medical kits open and people treating people, and policemen trying to direct traffic and telling people to go away and telling other people to come close, and investigators, and like it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And it's just chaos, absolute madness. And that is exactly what it's like. And then there's ambulances, and it just goes on and on. Yeah. And because of this, by the way, that's why there's no way to figure out exactly where you're needed. And so the best thing to do in such a scene is just start with what you have. And in this case, I got out of the car, people frantically called me over, so I'll start with where I'm wanted. And then I moved down, and then as I was in the middle of sharing, I was called over again somewhere else. And you kind of just keep being useful where you're needed. Now, if you feel that there's other people doing the smaller things, but you're more qualified, so you can go position yourself to do the bigger things, okay, go do that. But there's no way in a lot of cases to tell that that's happening. So I was just lone rangering it, kind of just going stop by stop, person by person, doing the thing. All right, so I'm going to jump back just for the sake of time. I find this crumpled kid in the sun on the floor in like a fetal position almost. And he's probably so hot. And this guy's standing over him and saying that he doesn't think he's physically wounded, which, by the way, you don't always know. You have to check. Sometimes people don't know when they're in such adrenaline and they are physically wounded. Anyways, I said, well, let's get him into a better position. So there was a woman nearby whose car was there stuck in the traffic. Her car was running with air conditioning. She said, put him in my car. So I said to this kid, can you speak to me? Can you hear me? And he kind of showed me that he could. He was speaking in a confused, lethargic way, and he was crying a lot. And I said, I would like to put you right now in somebody's car with air conditioning. Can you stand up? And he like kind of nodded his head, and I helped him stand up. A lot of times when people are starting to dissociate, it's hard for them to walk. It's hard for them to think. It's hard for them to make their own decisions. So you might want to lean in a little bit more and be directive. We put him in the car. We made sure to call his father. We made sure the father was coming on scene. We started working with him. And then soon enough, somebody that he knows, I think, came to attend and be next to him. And as far as I'm concerned, that's good enough in such a scenario. He's with a friend now. I'm going to keep moving. 10 seconds after this, again, quick, come over here. We need your help. And it was a young woman. I'm going to skip some unique details about her. But we start working with her, and she's crying, and she's married. And I say, are you in a relationship? Because I don't want to assume. Are you married? Do you want to tell your husband about what's going on? Yeah, sure. I can't call him. Can you call him? And sometimes people, they can't even think of the phone number of the spouse. They can't dial the phone number. I had a case like this in French Hill with the shooting attack there. So sometimes we're doing simple things like just she's sitting and crying, and she just can't even call her own husband. So we're executing that, and that is what PFA might look like. We put them on the phone, and then she says she wants to go to the hospital. This was because she had a medical situation before the attack, and she wants to make sure that what just happened in her previous condition, it doesn't exacerbate it. I won't give more details. And suddenly a EMT friend of mine walks up and says, I just arrived. I have an ambulance. Does she want to go to the hospital? I said, yes. He said, well, I can't take her unless you go in the back because that's the law. You need an EMT in the back when you transport. And then what happened was we said, once we're driving an ambulance to the hospital, maybe we can throw some more people in, which usually is not allowed. But in such a circumstance, they kind of look the other way. And so we filled up the ambulance with a number of very traumatized people. And we go and drive to the local hospital. On the way, I take everyone's vitals. I do PFA with each person. And we come back. So that whole trip is like 25 minutes there, 25 minutes back. And now we come back and see it an hour later. An hour later, we're ready to take more people to the hospital. And there's still people that need to go an hour later. You should understand how long these scenes can take. We took I'm skipping a little bit out of the order of the paper, but it's fine. We took a very, very dissociative woman who I think was the most dissociated person that I saw myself in the whole event. She could barely stand. She could barely talk. She can barely shake her head. I even, in the ambulance, to make sure she was conscious and she was with me, I have gloves in my hand and I say, can you hear me? And she barely nods her head. Do you know what day of week it is today? And she goes like this tiny subtle of a shake. So she doesn't even know what day of the week it is. And so I'm trying to bring her back into the present moment using different grounding techniques, anchoring techniques, leaning into Moshe Farhi's 6 C's model or Model Maaseh. If you look into that, that was with her. And then I know we're short for time and you have to go in 5 minutes. So at 1, you can leave and I'll continue with the information. We had another few people who were shaken up, but PFA was as simple as offering your presence to them, taking vitals, encouraging them, nothing too sophisticated or complex. We had one really interesting case where there was a girl who basically ran away from the scene and got a ride home. And she was a very young woman. And she had a pre-existing severe mental health condition. And she was already, well, I'm going to give this away, but she was really shaken up. She was full of adrenaline. She was shaking. And this was already like 2 hours after the event. Her body is still full of chemicals, still just like this. And her knees are bopping up and down. And she asked to be taken to the hospital. And at this point, there was already a field hospital with psychological triage. So I said, why don't you just go to the, psychological center? She's like, no, I have certain mental health attacks of a certain problem. And this is a chronic issue that I've had for many years. And I'm used to going to the hospital. And I want familiarity. And I want to go to the same old hospital. And that's what I do. And that's what I want. And so I saw she knew exactly what she wanted. And I love customers like that. That's great. And I was with her for a few minutes. And I said, can I tell you something? It seems like if it's okay for me to say this, it seems like you really invested a bunch of years of therapy in yourself. And I could just tell, because I do psychotherapy for a living. And I could just tell the way you're walking and talking and all your mannerisms. I don't know if you do DPT or some other thorough toolbox of kit, but I could just, everything about you is exuding that you're like a well built up person. And she said, absolutely, that is accurate, 100%. And so it was amazing to see that in real time. And you can notice it. You could see it on the person. You could mamish literally see it on the person. So that was very cool to see. We put her in the ambulance. And then as we were driving to the hospital, right? She ran away to home. So we picked her up at home. We were driving by the scene again, and they filled in the ambulance with a few other people as well. And one of them was this girl that was close in age to this other girl. And they started holding hands and hugging as like their best friends. And I said, do you know each other? And they're like, we met at the shooting. We ran away together. They just ran away in different directions. You see this happen also when there's very crazy events, is that people bond very powerfully through this unique event that they share together that they don't share with other people. I know you have to go in a minute, so if you want to say anything else, Yisrael, take it away. And if not, I'll let you go on your way, and I'm going to continue. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you. This is fascinating, and I'm excited to see the rest of this recording once it's available, to hear about the rest of the day. One question that I would love for you to address, but I don't have time to hear the answer to now, but maybe you can address it at some point in the recording and I'll hear later, is about self-care while you're on the scene. Like sort of going back to very related to my question of assessing in advance of whether you're going to be an asset or a liability, staying on top of your own state and your own needs while you're on scene, so focused on everything outside of you and the needs of others. How do you have like every some number of minutes you have a reminder on your phone to check in with yourself, or like is there some plan of how to stay on top of your own state to make sure that you don't fall apart in the situation? And I imagine that a lot of the answer is going to be kind of intangible and just a general perspective that you develop with experience. But for someone who's never walked onto a scene like this before, having a plan or a tool or something in place, or even just knowledge in place of how to do that effectively would demystify and make it a lot less nerve-wracking to plan how I would keep my own state stable while in that kind of a situation.
All right. I will address it. I will let you go and then address it so that you can be on your way. To be continued.
Okay.
Make sure to watch the end.
Thanks for this opportunity.
Okay.
All righty.
Next time
Be
we'll
in
budget
touch.
more time. All right.
Okay.
So we're going to continue for now without Yisro. It took us extra time today because I was trying to transcribe all of these voice notes into the written words so I can use it as kind of a way to remember what happened. So Yisro wanted to know about if and how there's a way to do self-care during the event. I think it really is going to depend on the pace, tempo, and type of event, because there are events where maybe the typical PFA tragedy event where somebody died, and you're there for maybe an hour or two, and you're busy, but the world won't come crashing down if you take a 5-minute pause and you kind of go to a corner and you do whatever it is that you need to do, which if you feel like you need self-care, then you'll go do that in the way that you will. You'll do some breathing, a tactical pause, you'll call a friend or supervisor. I could tell you that I know dozens of people that do psychological first aid, and I've been doing this for many years, and we typically never take a break during an ongoing event. We kind of just take the break after the event. We don't feel that we need to take it during. Obviously, if somebody feels they need to, then they need to. So no, we don't check in here and there with ourselves and see how we're feeling and doing this type of thing. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I can tell you that that's not common practice. Now, again, in an ideal PFA situation with psychological first aid, giving it to other people in a critical incident, the best is really that we have a buddy system, a battle buddy, as they might call it in the military, right? Or a partner. And in that case, then it's much easier to check in with somebody else because you're standing next to somebody you know, as opposed to doing it by yourself. And I don't pause and stop in the middle of something unless I need to for a technical reason. I definitely will decompress after an event, but I don't typically find that I need to do it during an event. So that's why I don't know how to answer that question. But if you need to, then you need to. In the case of the Ramot Junction shooting, the tempo was very fast, unusually fast. And so it wouldn't have even allowed for this because you're walking into this mob of people and vests and lights and sirens and cars and equipment sprawled all over the floor. And people are pulling you in every direction. Quick, quick, come here. I need you. Please come here, sir. And like, there was not a moment to breathe. There was not a moment to breathe. So instead of it being, a baby died at home sort of event where like you have time to kind of slow down and you set the pace, here you were being pulled in every direction. Now, again, you can still stop at any time and do whatever you want. And if that's how you want to do your modus operandi, that's fine. But here it was really just moving from person in need to person in need to person in need, from station to station to station. And then when we started the ambulance transports, it was transport number 1, transport number 2, transport number 3. Now I can tell you about the pace that I think it can affect a person's trauma, because when a person is slower down, right, they're at a slower pace, kind of absorbing what's going on, then they are receiving the information, they're encoding it in their memory, they're remembering it better, and I think they're able to process it better. We find in trauma that when people have no time to think, then memory is very, very skewed and is not remembered well. And that's why in the 6 C's model of Dr. Farhi, or Model Ma'aseh, or Yahalom, as it's called in Hebrew, that's why they have this component where you might even build with somebody a narrative of what happened, a trauma narrative, right? Because a person goes on scene and they don't remember what was first, what was second, and what was third. And they may even remember false information and hallucinate that information. And there's a lot of studies about this. There's a guy named Artwall, Artwhol, I think that's his name. But there's a whole institute of psychological research where they take cops and other people who are in violent encounters, and they study what did they remember versus what did the videotape show versus what did other people on scene remember. And you find that people remember things that never happened, and they remember inaccurately. And I could say that this was one of those scenes for me. Not because anyone was shooting at me. And in fact, I didn't even see any bodies. I didn't hear any shooting, and I didn't see any blood, because I showed up on scene at the part of the scene which was higher up, where everyone ran away to. I didn't show up to the part of the scene where they ran away from, because that was further east from where I am. So, and then I didn't really know the news story because I didn't have time to check the news. I was at scene. I was making the news, so I didn't have time to look at the news and say, how many shooters were there? Were they neutralized? And what happened? And all I knew was from my first responder radio. And I knew that as far as they could tell, there were only 2 guys. And as far as they can tell, both 2 guys were neutralized. Maybe there's a 3rd guy. Maybe there's 15 more shot people that we don't know about. Maybe there's another scene that they went to first. Who knows? Right? In the Neve Yaakov shooting, which was a Friday night terror attack a few years ago. And there I didn't go to it because I wanted to go, and my wife stood in the door and blocked me. She was afraid I would get killed. And after that event, we negotiated when she'll let me go to these scenes. And I explained to her how I mitigate risk to be safe. And we kind of came to an understanding that I could go to these active shooting scenes as long as I keep the things that I said, which is to be careful and mitigate risk professionally in the different professional ways that I know. But anyhow, at that scene in the Neve Yaakov shooting, I'm mumbling so much because there's just too much to share. There were 7 different locations, or 4 different locations, where he would shoot somebody, drive to somewhere else, shoot somebody, drive to somewhere else. So you have things like that too, right? Anyhow, so here I was on scene of this event, but I don't really know what happened at the event. And then every time I try to take a breather, somebody's quick, help me. and you get pulled in a different direction. The only time I had a slight breather was when we were driving from the hospital back to transport more people. So I had like 15, 20 minutes where we weren't with patients. And so I went to my police partner friend, and he's sent me a WhatsApp because he's always thinking of me. He's an amazing guy. And he said, is there anything I could do to help you right now? And he is a very helpful person. He can help in so many ways. I know him from the field in EMS and in police, and he's a physician. Like, he can do anything, this guy. And I said, you know what you can help me with? I have no idea what happened. And for my own trauma narrative and for closure and for processing, I need to know what the facts were. Who showed up on scene? When did they show up? What weapon did they use? How many people are injured? What are their statuses? If you can gather that information and send it to me throughout the day, that would literally help me with my trauma. I'm going to take a pause and talk about, should we look at videos that are traumatic from these scenes? Because at this point on my phone was blowing up with videos of people being shot and people running away and yelling and eyewitnesses on the news saying what they saw and this type of thing. I am a big proponent throughout PFA that no one size fits all, and you should do whatever is good for you. It really annoys me when experts get out and they say, there's this gory video, do not watch it. That might be good advice for most people. So don't mishear me. That might be good for 95% of people. But there might be some people that, for their own closure, they want to watch that video to understand what happened. And they feel a little bit of a sense of mastery, that they kind of are like, when I was standing next to the bus and I heard the shooting, it was coming from there. And then all the people were running. And then I realized the event happened because I saw them running. And then, okay, that person that I saw later on was standing there with me, right? You start to put the pieces together, and that might be valuable for someone. So for therapists and so-called PFA experts to come and make this blanket rule, you cannot watch this video. Who says? That's their personal choice. Hopefully they'll make a wise choice. Hopefully they have a good reason why they want to watch it. And hopefully it will be helpful, but it really is helpful to people sometimes. And I'm one of those people, I could tell you. So when I was in this ambulance on the way back, I was watching these videos and be like, one second, that was like CCTV footage. What angle did this happen? And I needed this for trauma, for my own processing of what happened, right? Because even though I didn't see blood and gore and hear shooting, it's traumatizing that in my neighborhood, I'm on scene working with people who are crying and bawling and dissociated and running back and forth and fleeing for their lives and just really broken, right? There's no one size fits all in PFA, and there's never going to be. And you got to beware from the experts that have simple solutions. Don't go to the funeral, do go to the funeral. Don't look at the body, do look at the body. Don't watch the video, do look at the video. There's no one size fits all. But hopefully you're wise enough to make a good choice. And maybe the PFA provider's job is to collaboratively interview and work with this person and help them make a good decision and speak out the different sides. And then that person will make their own choice. I can tell you many people that I spoke to over the years are very resentful their whole life that they didn't get to look at a body or they didn't get to go to a funeral. And this should be cut out as a short. This should be cut out as a short by the editor, because you are stealing somebody's opportunity to see their father one more time or whatever it might be, right? To part with somebody, to have closure with somebody. You can't steal from them an opportunity. You can invite them to consider the two different sides of what they're getting into. You can show them the pros and cons, but they have to choose. We do not choose for them. The biggest sign of a person who's not an expert in PFA is those people that they go and they give these blanket one-size-fits-all statements. And this short should go to therapists too. All right, let's continue. So we're doing these ambulance shifts back and forth, 1, 2, 3. And at this point, we've taken at least 8 people to the hospital. So we've done PFA with all 8 people. Either we were doing grounding techniques and using Dr. Farhi's toolkit, a lot of cognitive questioning to get people moving from the amygdala over to the prefrontal cortex, asking them questions like, where do you live? Are you in a relationship? Do you have any children? Do you own a car? How long have you lived in this neighborhood? Where were you on the way to? What do you do for a living? And you have to be sensitive, and you can't assume people are married, and you can't assume people are kids, but you carefully, sometimes you ask these questions, and these are very technical questions that are somewhat relevant to the scene, right? As opposed to saying, what's 5 plus 8, right? You can ask that too. That's also a cognitive question, but it's a little bit out of place. So with some of the work that I did with one of my colleagues, Ayelet Shmuel, in the Resilience Center and in the International Resilience Center of Sderot, she always likes teaching Farhi's intervention in a way that it's somewhat relevant to the scene. You also sometimes want to ask questions like these because you want to know the answer, right? When I ask someone if they're in a relationship, it's because I want to build with them a social support network and make sure they reached out to that person, which is step 6 in the NCTSN model of PFA. So now I asked one woman, are you in a relationship? And she said, no, I'm divorced. And that's a good answer. It was a good question and a good answer. It wasn't bad that I asked. And I said, okay, is there anybody that you would like to be here with you right now? And she said, yes, my uncle. And what was interesting was the uncle was the same age as her, right? And that sometimes happens. When I think of uncles, I think of somebody that's 20 years older, right? But the uncle was the same age as her. They were both in their 30s. But that's fine. All right, so we transported all these people, and then we came eventually back onto scene. We put the ambulance back at the base. It was already 2 p.m. at this time. So we've been on scene, running back and forth, running around from 10:15 a.m. till 2 p.m. straight. The place where the ambulance was deposited was in a different neighborhood. So I went with the ambulance driver to put it away over there. And then he took his personal car and drove me back to my car to then take my car back home, right? Because that's part of the chaos sometimes of this scene, of this type of scene, right? And you also have to know if you're going to do PFA work often, because maybe you're in a team or you just want to be ready for the next call, you should have food and water. Because I didn't eat breakfast that day. It's 2 p.m. I'm exhausted and I'm weak. And I had to go to the bathroom really bad. So having a kit with food and with water, in case of emergency, I recommend it on a good day for every citizen to have a bug out bag in their car. And we can make a different video about that one day. And I have a bag in my house and a bag in my car. And I have some gear in the office. But in this case, I wasn't with my bug out bag from 10:15 a.m. till 2 because once I got into the ambulance, I was in an ambulance. But thank God the ambulance was stocked with water, so I didn't get dehydrated. So I made sure to drink throughout the day. But now I show up at 2:30 p.m. and I get to this office that I'm sitting in, and I found some food that I scrounged around together, and I start eating. And I get a phone call right away as I'm eating, finally settling down. And somebody from an organization says, we set up a field hospital with a psychological triage and treatment center. The guy who's here now is about to leave. Can you come? There's a whole line of people waiting to speak to a PFA provider. So I said, I just sat down to eat. I need to eat so I don't faint. But when I'm done, I'm happy to come. Right? Because you have to put boundaries. You got to put boundaries. And I know my limits. And I've done this many years and many times. So he said, okay, no problem. How long do you think it will take? I said, 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, I will drive to your location. So after 15 minutes of eating, I drove to the location. There was a line of people really waiting to speak to people. Some of them were ultra-Orthodox Jews, and females and insistent only on speaking to a woman. And that's fine, because culturally, you gotta work with the person you want to help. You can't disrespect them, fight with them, want them to be somebody else. I said, would it be comfortable for you? Not that we work one-on-one, because I understand that's not comfortable, that's fine. But would it be okay if we took all the women and we made a group? They said, sure, okay. Now, there were, in my opinion, some people there that maybe were not so skilled. I don't like talking about other people, but for the sake of a training video like this, I have to say what I have to say. And when PFA providers are not trained, they get on their phone a lot and they speak a lot to the supervisor, and they're very busy on their phone, and they're much less busy with the people sitting in front of them waiting for help. And you got to have courage, and you got to jump into the water and swim. So I think there was somebody there that once we clarified that they were comfortable with the group, he should have sat down and he should have run a group. But he didn't. He kind of dilly-dallied and he kind of waited and he kind of dragged his feet and whatever it was. Maybe I can judge him favorably. Maybe there's something I don't know about. And so they kind of just waited around. Meanwhile, I was going to work one-on-one with the men. And eventually, this guy, I don't know if he even did anything, and then he left, and then some other woman came, and then I had her run a group. So, if you're not good at what you're doing, please don't do it. And if you want to get good, hire me to give a course. I give an amazing course, maybe the best. And I'm not saying that to brag, but I really put years into the course, and I have unparalleled experience. And again, I'm not saying this to brag, but as an EMT and as a police officer and as an urban search and rescue commander and as a psychotherapist who went to over 2,000 psychological first aid calls, and one day it's going to be 3,000 and I stopped counting, and I've been to wars and I've been in wars, natural disasters, I have a good course. So take it. And you should be confident. And after the course, I love being in touch with alumni, and I love empowering you as a student to get out there and get your feet wet and be successful. And I'm happy to supervise you because I want you to succeed. But don't show up unseen if you don't know what you're doing. And it's sad, but that's what happens. And a lot of organizations say, oh, we have therapists, so they must be trained in this. Like, no, therapists are not trained in crisis work. They are not. They do not learn this in university. They're never going to learn this unless they go through specialized training. And then people skimp on the training and they say, oh, we'll bring Avi to do a 1-hour workshop or a 3-hour workshop, and then that's going to make them an expert provider. Like, no, it's not going to. If you want to be an expert provider, you need to take my 16-hour course, and you need to then keep in touch with our alumni community. That's what you need to do. And that's why I'm making this video, is for the alumni community, but maybe we'll release it for the public. Okay, so, right, well, what's the word? Iatrogenesis, right? Which is first do no harm. If you're going to show up and seen to help, so be a assertive, confident, competent, excellent person that leans in and leads people. Now, I'm not trying to shame anybody that's new and took our course and they did the 16-hour course, and they just don't have so much experience. I'm not shaming you, right? But I'm talking about the people who think they know and don't know and never even took a training on this, and they show up at these scenes. And I can tell you, over the last decade and a half, almost 2 decades, there's too many of these people that it's a real problem. I got to keep watering for my voice. Okay. I sat down with my first male patient in this triage center, and he was a elderly man. And I said, how could I be of assistance to you? Right? And I knew that I could, right? When I teach my course, I teach people to say, is there a way I can be helpful to you? Because you shouldn't assume. But in this case, he was in a line in an office, sitting in the chair, waiting for me to speak to him. So I knew he wanted something, right? So I said, how can I be of assistance to you? And he said, I was on the scene when A, B, and C happened, when the shooting happened. I saw bullets whiz right by me. I prayed, and I'm a man of faith. I'm very, very religious, and I think about God all the time, very spiritual, because maybe religion and spirituality is not the same, right? And I want to know if we could talk. I said, sure, let's talk. What should we talk about? And he said, well, I'm here for you to talk to me. And you have to understand this happens a lot with people. And I don't know if I always address this in the PFA course. It's important to put in the course. I said, well, how did you know to come to this center? Who gave you this idea? How did you come up with this idea to come here and wait in line for me and you to talk? He said, well, my wife told me it's important. So what happens a lot of times in PFA is there's a belief where if a bad thing happens, you have to talk to somebody. And this applies across the board to everybody. And this is one of those blanket rules that I think, again, should be cut out into a short and should be shown to therapists and shown to the community. If something bad happens, it is important to talk about it. It is important to process it. But that doesn't mean everybody needs to, and it doesn't mean everybody needs to in the same way. And what happens is people bully their loved ones into seeing a therapist, a PFA provider. Oh, you were in the attack today. You have to talk to somebody. You have to get it out. And they believe in what's called catharsis. There's this magical belief where you saw something, therefore it absolutely will harm you, which is not a given. Because maybe people are resilient. Maybe it's not going to harm them. Who says? So it's an unfair thing to say, right? So they say, you have to speak to someone because you were at that car accident, you were at that shooting, and if you don't, it will come back to you. Well, who says? And even if we have to speak, maybe we have to speak for 5 minutes and that's sufficient, or maybe we have to speak for 3 hours, or maybe you need therapy for 2 years. It's going to depend. And the sign of an expert is when he doesn't give a one-size-fits-all answer. And I'm going to keep coming back to that because that is one of the biggest proofs that you know what you're doing. It really is. Or that you don't know what you're doing. So I spoke to this man and I did some basic psychoeducation and I said, it's very good that you came. You know, your wife cares about you and she wanted you to come and make sure you're okay. Do you feel traumatized? Do you have any sort of difficulty? Is there anything that's kind of bothering you? He said, no, just I'm only here because my wife said I should come. So we did some basic psychoeducation, and I'm not going to go into that now because the video is getting kind of long already. But I said to him, it is true that after events like this, it is important to talk to somebody, especially if you feel you're having a hard time. But I think if you're not having a hard time, you're allowed to be okay, and you're allowed to go home. And of course, if you see that you're having a hard time in the days to come, I want you to reach out to someone. And we can also make a plan now of what you would do if that would happen, if you'd like to. But just for the sake of talking to someone in a magical way to get the demon out of you, which you may not even have inside of you, I think you're okay. You're an older, wise rabbi, community figure. You've seen life. You've been through things. And I invite you to be resilient and be in touch if you need follow-up in the days to come. But I think we've spoken for the sake of speaking. And if you want to be in touch with people in the days to come, there are different resources, and I told them what resources. This sort of question came up again and again. After this man came, another guy came, a middle-aged adult, and we did some PFA. This person was concerned physically, that they may have been physically harmed in a particular way. So we checked their vitals and went over some physical concerns and wanted to make sure they were okay. But psychologically, again, I kind of felt like they were coming to talk about it because somebody said they should. And in this case, it was a wonderful mental health professional who was also an aspiring young talent. And this professional actually took one of our classes, and she is aware. And so that was good that she brought this adult with her. But we spoke very briefly, and I don't think they really needed an intervention, but it was good that they came. It was a very nice meeting. It was nice that we had a brief talk, but I wouldn't go and say, oh, he needed me and I saved him and he was broken. And if we wouldn't have spoken, his life would have been changed forever. I don't think so. And the reason why I'm saying this is not to say that her judgment was bad for bringing him. That's not the point. But it's to highlight how resilient people are. We have to keep saying this. We have to keep highlighting people are very, very resilient. If you look at the studies in the course that we mentioned, in most incidents like this type of critical incidents and tragedy, most people are not going to be traumatized. And if they are acutely, they're not going to move from the acute stress reaction stage into the acute stress disorder stage. And if they're in the acute stress disorder stage, most of those people don't move into the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder stage. So what that shows you is people are resilient. People are resilient. As a friend, I'm happy to talk to any neighbor, don't get me wrong. And it wasn't a waste of my time, and it wasn't bad that they brought them. But I'm not going to have anybody think that I went and saved this person with some incredible intervention. And that was an important point to make. So at this point, we spoke to a woman on the bench, a guy on a sidewalk. That's 3 people. Then we transported 8 people, so we're up to 11. Then 2 people in the field hospital triage place. So now we're up to 13. And then I said, I really got to get moving. I don't remember exactly what happened at this time. Could be I spoke to some other people, but I don't remember. And then as I was about to leave, Murphy's Law says that somebody else is going to show up. So they showed up, and she was on the phone, and she says, hey, before you go, can I ask you a question? I'm on the phone with so-and-so. And she was at the attack, and somebody told her mother told her, somebody, that she has to speak to somebody and she has to get it out of her system. So what do you say? And again, this is so common that people ask this and think this way. So again, we did the psychoeducation. We said, I'm more than happy for her to come or for me to speak on the phone. But when we need to come, it's when we feel we need to, not because somebody said you should. Now, sometimes you're in denial and you really should, but you think you don't. So as long as she's not in denial and she's functioning well and she's happy and healthy and resilient, the fact that she's got some scratches on herself and she's going to, have a little bit of symptomology for the next few days, but she's carrying herself successfully and it's not getting in the way of functioning in her daily roles. Like, how do you define any mental health issue? It's if it gets in the way of daily functioning, right? So I said, as long as she's able to carry on and be herself and be okay, there's no requirement that she has to come here and talk to me right now. And of course, if she later on finds it's hard for her to eat and hard for her to sleep and hard for her to go out of the house and whatever it might be, any and every sort of symptom under the sun, then yes, she should definitely reach out. And there are different resources, and here are those resources, right? So again, doing this sort of psychoeducation. Then we went home. I went home and I quickly ate supper, so my family. And I forgot to mention that when I saw my family, I remembered this, that at about 12:30 or 1 p.m., my daughter got out of school for a break and she called me up and said, are you okay? I said, I'm okay. Did you hear what happened at the Ramot Junction? I said, yeah, I was there. Where are you right now? I said, I'm in the hospital, but I'm okay. I'm in the hospital because I'm transporting patients. She's like, are you lying to me? Because she knows me. Are you lying to me? Are you really okay? Yep, I'm really okay. So that was one of my daughter's ways of relating. And then my son called a few minutes later, and they're close in age, right? And he asks a totally different question. He's like, Dad, you heard about what happened? Were you there? Yeah, I was there. All right, tell me about it later. And that was his reaction. So you see that everybody relates differently. I got WhatsApps from people crying, asking me if I was okay and worrying about me. So everybody relates differently, and we're all different, and that's okay. At 8:30 p.m., the first responders on scene got together and did a debrief. It was run very, very well. You had 2 mental health professionals and a high-ranking first responder coordinator commander. Which, speaking of which, my radio is going off, so let's just check that everything's okay. All right, well, anyways, we'll continue for now. Where was I? So we went to this debriefing. It was very powerful to hear all of the first responders share. And we spoke earlier about how people have a certain version of what happened when they're on scene, but you don't know if the version that you have when you were on scene is accurate. And so when you do a debriefing, not only is it professionally very, very sound and helpful, but you hear 30 other first responders on scene tell the story, and then you piece together a full picture, and it's a really amazing experience. That's one reason why it's important to do a debriefing. It's not because we do critical incident stress debriefing from 1970 and force people to share. We never force people to do anything. I've read the books of George Everly from Johns Hopkins, and I've learned the rapid model. I wouldn't say I'm a big fan. I don't think it's bad. I'm not a big fan. I get very nervous about when we get people to say things. I really don't think they have to. I think if a person wants to share something, they can, and if they don't want to, they don't have to. We're not going to force anyone. We're not going to prompt anyone. I never in my career said, "Tell me what happened." I never once said that, not once, because I find that simple rule. If somebody wants to share something, they will. If we're doing a debriefing, we might invite them in very particular questions that we expect the group to answer, and then through that, they'll have the choice to share more or share less. That's okay, right? So, anyhow, and with all due respect to the rapid model and Johns Hopkins and Dr. Everly and all that, I'm sure it has a lot of value, but there's a very fine line that I walk when I do debriefings. Anyways, in this case, I was being debriefed, and they did it in a beautiful way. They gave a brief introduction, and then they basically said, we'll go around the room, and everybody that was there should share where they were at the time that the event came in, right? And so people went around the room. One person said, "Oh, I happened to have been driving by." Another one said, "I was dropping off my kids from school." The third one said, "I was just at home." So everyone was sharing where they were at the time of the event. And that's a really nice question because it kind of sets the stage for the rest of the debriefing and the sharing. And there's nothing shameful and there's nothing heavy about it. So it's just a nice, light way to get rolling, right? And then the debriefer person said, "What did you feel en route when you were driving on the way to this call?" Some people said responsibility. Some people said fear. Some people said adrenaline. Some people said confusion. I personally felt a sense of responsibility. Like, I want to be on scene and be able to kill the terrorists and save lives if I can, because I feel I'm skilled to do that. I have inside of me what it takes. I have the equipment, the knowledge, and the fortitude to do it. And I'm more than happy. And it's my responsibility to the weak and vulnerable to be there for them when they need. And who else is going to do it if it's not every person who's able to do it to step up to the plate? But the debriefer said, "What did you feel en route?" And that was a really nice way to kind of take it from the earlier question of where were you when it began, which was a night question, to a middle question. intermediate question, and then they moved on to what moment defined the event for you. And that was a really beautiful question. And it was an open question that each person can define for himself what was the hardest part of the event, what was the most touching or meaningful part of the event. And some people shared 1 minute and some people shared 5 minutes. And to me, that's a great way to do debriefing, because you're giving everybody the room to share whatever they want to share. And it's very powerful, because since you approached in such a light, safe way, and you've made it so easy for people to feel calm and comfortable, so now people are much more willing to share than just, bogging them down with some serious, okay, guys, you're all traumatized, you better share. Oh, you're not sharing? It's because you're in denial, right? People used to do things like this. And I'm not saying Dr. Everly does that at all. I'm not saying that, so don't come back to me in an angry email and say that. But some people still do that to this day. And then some people they're very heavy and they're very intense, especially therapists. Oh gosh, they're so intense. And especially therapists that don't go to these scenes and they're not used to emergency. They're busy grimacing and squirming in their chairs when they're hearing about blood and gore when they're doing a debriefing. So you can't do that if you're not qualified. You have to be with us when you're debriefing us. You have to be comfortable and be present and stay with us as we need. Right? Because if you're busy squirming in your chair when I'm talking about how I found the arm of the guy here and the leg of the guy there, then you probably can't debrief me very well. I'm not going to respect you, and you're not broadcasting calm, and you're not going to be an anchor for me. So it's just not going to work. All right, so the debriefing was very, very beautiful, very nice. Everyone got to share how much they wanted, how they wanted, and there was a positive peer pressure that everybody is expected to share something. So you raise the bar low enough that people can have the willingness to share, and also give them the expectation that they should share. And it's important, and you've given the introduction why that's the case. And you're there to help them if they need, and that's fine. And some people say, I want to go last. Okay, so go last, no problem. I also want to go last. Okay, so you'll go second to last, right? You want to really open the door for everybody to feel comfortable. Also because of stigma, because of shame, because people are not used to emoting. Maybe they feel very overwhelmed or uncomfortable with their emotions. They don't know emotional literacy, how to put their emotions into words. So, this is a great opportunity to help them, whether it's people on the scene of a shooting or whether it's first responders afterwards. Not everyone is a psychotherapist that has a big vocabulary and professional nomenclature to use to discuss things, right? And that's okay, that's fine. So we did this debriefing. There was a lot of really interesting shares in the debriefing. One share that stuck out was a brand new EMT who he ended up getting to scene. It was his first ever significant critical incident, terror attack, tragedy. And he said he was so wound up with so much adrenaline, he was shaking, his voice was cracking, and he couldn't do anything. He could not be functional. He did not treat a single patient. He did not speak to a single person. He just stood and shook. That's all he did. And I think it was very brave of him to share that in the debrief. And this guy needs a lot of stress inoculation. And of course, the commander in front of everybody encouraged them. It said, we were all like that in the beginning. Don't worry about it. You just need some more exposure, some more experience in the field. That's fine. That's normal. And from our perspective in PFA, that's how the nervous system works, right? There was another guy who said he was at the previous major terror attack, which was a ramming attack, and he was not yet an EMT, and he stood and he felt helpless seeing all these bodies all over, and he didn't know what to do. And that's why, because of that event, which was in 2023, I think in April, but I'm not sure, that's why he went and became a certified EMT over the last 2 years, So he said this for him was healing to be at this event because it was the closure for him of the helplessness of the previous event. So that was a very significant share. There was a third share of a guy who said that he went to the scene, and he's an EMT for many years. And when he got on scene, he started dissociating so much that he sat in his car, did not get out, and he just froze in the car for over an hour until a policeman rapped on his window and told him to move his car because it was blocking traffic. And he said the reason why he was so traumatized was because he was at the Meron civil disaster where 45 people were killed. And he said this event, which is a shooting event, was sitting for him on that event because there were bodies that were covered, and here there were bodies that were lying on the floor. So to him, this was just the same event, and he dissociated literally for an hour. And may I remind you that some studies claim, and I don't know if this is accurate, but they make this claim, that one of the telltale signs that will predict PTSD later is what's called paratraumatic dissociation. It's somebody who's in the acute phase of a disaster, and they're very much so dissociating on scene right in front of you. Now, this is a big debate if you can even predict signs in the scene that will tell you later on who's going to have PFA. It's a big, who's going to have PTSD. It's a big controversy. It's not easy to determine this, and I'm not even going to take a side, but he was displaying paratraumatic dissociation. So that was a significant share. And then one more significant share was you had a dispatcher. We have to talk about the piano in a second. But one significant share was you had a dispatcher that shared, and people always forget about the dispatchers who are receiving the calls. And the first moments of these events, dispatchers are always forgotten. They're left to the wayside, and it's not good. And I'm actually in the middle of making a special course for dispatchers. But this dispatcher said he was sitting in his office doing administrative work, not even being at the call center console. And so many calls came in from this event that it started to spill over onto the phones of the different administrative offices, because that's like the backup. That's how it works, right? So he answered the phone, and a child was calling and saying, I'm at this bus stop, there's shooting, there's bodies, there's terrorist attack. And this dispatcher just received a prank call from a child an hour before. So he wasn't even sure to take it seriously, but he made the wise decision to assume it's real, because you can never know. But what happens if you hang up on the child and it's real? So he tried to find the strength and motivation to assume it's real and said, okay, tell me what's going on. How old are you? Where are you right now? What do you see? And this dispatcher was just amazed, absolutely amazed that this child was so young, a 12-year-old child, and he was able with such calmness to get on the phone and talk about bodies and terrorists and a gun. And he was just able to be so descriptive and so helpful, and even call, like even just calling, like pretty amazing. And then eventually the dispatcher says to him, is there an adult near you? Give me an adult. So the kid starts going, soldier, soldier, come here. It's like really being like a boss and running the show. So this kid has some great leadership skills. And to come full circle with this story, I ended up meeting the kid very accidentally, and ended up speaking to him and speaking to some of his loved ones. And I told him that the dispatcher was really proud of him, and he saved a lot of lives by making that call. There was another very significant person who made a report on the radio, and that was the first responder on scene. He got on scene and he said, I see ABC. There are these many terrorists. There's these many guns. There's these many bodies. The fact that the kid said it is amazing, but the fact that a first responder shows up after the kid said it and certifies from the perspective of a first responder and a professional, what does he actually see? Not just what a kid thinks he sees, but what a adult expert sees. That changes everything. And so we had a motorcycle EMT show up on scene, and he gave the most amazing, calm, detail-filled reports on the radio. And this helped everybody on scene because we're all driving. We don't know if the shooting is still going. We don't know what to expect. Psychologically, it helps. Professionally, it helps. And this was a big deal. One more thing, and then we're going to move on and wrap up, is one of the guys in the debriefing said that whenever he sees a friend of his on social media who's a first responder playing piano with his first responder motorcycle jacket on, then he knows it's bad. So I didn't know what he was talking about. So I went to this guy's social media later on in the day. And he, lo and behold, was sitting and playing a beautiful, beautiful song on piano. I don't know the name of the song. Real piano, some old, wonderful, deep sound that he was creating. And that was this first responder's way of processing what he heard and what he witnessed and what happened. And whenever bad things happen, I didn't know this about my friend. He's a good friend of mine. But whenever bad things happen and he's traumatized, he goes and plays piano. And he does it straight off of the scene. He'll go straight from his motorcycle home, get onto the piano, and start playing. And he played so beautifully. So it's so wonderful to see first responders with awareness. And they are busy taking care of themselves and processing. It was very cool to see. That is as far as the debriefing. The debriefing finished. And then there were more people that wanted to speak to me and get PFA afterwards. Then I went home. Then I got in pajamas. Then I got a phone call as I was about to turn off my phone. Come quick. There's another person that just showed up. And they really need your help too. And that was a person that was having a lot of intrusive thoughts. And they were afraid to go to sleep. And they were afraid to pass the scene on the bus on the way home. And a lot of very common symptoms that we see. And I literally opened up a session with them. And this was like a real advanced PFA session that you might typically give not just the first hour of the event, but maybe a few days later too. It was a wonderful session. We gave them what they needed and we sent them off on their way. They were very, very appreciative. And then calls kept coming in Tuesday morning and Tuesday afternoon. And just a lot of stuff. And then, of course, this created all sorts of I'm just trying to take this off the screen share. I think I do it like this, right? It created all sorts of problems that we now have to solve because there's still people that need psychological first aid, and there's people that we need to meet together and create better safety in the neighborhood. There's a number of security meetings that are happening, fundraiser initiatives that started. There's a whole other section I forgot to tell you, so let me get this in before we wrap it up. In events like this, there's a lot of death notifications that have to happen. And in this case, because people didn't see that I was around because I was busy being in an ambulance back and forth, so I didn't end up doing really any death notifications. It was some senior first responder coordinators and commanders that they were involved in this. And so you had a number of deceased people on scene. And so now there's the work of trying to go find their loved ones, and especially if it's kids or maybe it's a spouse at work. And now you need a ton of personnel, and you have to start figuring out where do they go to school? What's the name of the school? What's the address? And then meeting with the school staff and speaking to the surviving spouse and making sure that they want to execute this plan and making that plan together. And now you're going to help the spouse that's surviving at home by going and picking up their 8 different kids and pulling them out of kindergarten, first grade, 5th grade, high school, bringing them all home, and creating a collaborative plan to do the death notification and then giving it over to the kids, and then holding on to those kids after they found out their father died, their mother died. And this is a really heavy, heavy, heavy part of PFA. And that's probably one of the most traumatizing parts of PFA as a PFA provider. It's not even just bodies, it's seeing the agony and brokenness of the children, of the spouse, the widow, the husband, the wife, the surviving person after these events, the parents. It's hard to talk about. And so there were some first responders who were sharing about their role in doing this. And it's highly traumatic. It really is really terrible. And I'll just say a snippet. You meet with a surviving spouse or loved one or family member and you make a plan with them. And then we go execute that plan together, right? So this commander did this in a very professional way. He's not even trained in PFA, but he's got it intuitively. He's just 20 years in the field and he's very intelligent. And they made this plan that he's going to go bring all the kids home, and then the surviving parent is going to call each kid in one at a time to a room and kind of give them the news and sit with them. So it's a heavy topic. They carry that out, and now you have all these children who are orphans, and it's heartbreaking. And they went and gave to these children a bunch of keychains. Kids, and especially young kids, love toys, and it can also be a security blanket. In a previous job where I helped develop their PFA team, they used to give out toys and gear at these events so that somebody has something to hold on to. I know that in a recent trauma kit that I was given by my ambulance organization, they gave me a little teddy bear. I forgot about it, but it's in one of my newest trauma kits in my trunk. So, those things go a long way. Anyhow, this parents called all the kids into a room one at a time. I sometimes do it with everybody together. There's a lot of detail to this that I'm skipping, and broke the news. And then they were all broken and crying, confused, not sure what it means. Some of the kids were too young to understand what is the finality of death. What does that mean? What does it mean that mom died or dad died? Well, practically, what does it mean? When are they coming home? Tell me when they're coming home. They don't understand. And they gave them these toys, and these toys cheered the kids up. And then the first responder was sharing about the crazy dissonance and gap between, we just told these kids that their parent died and they were broken, and then we gave them a keychain and they were happy and showing it off to their siblings. Like, how does it even make sense? And there doesn't have to be an answer to that, right? There could be an answer, but even if there's no answer, there's a lot of things you see in these events from beginning to end that are just terrible. And they just are what they are. Anyways, going back to the event, we ended up working with this girl late at night. We got another phone call about somebody who, one of their children was close with one of the people who was murdered, and how did they break the news to their child, and should their institution attend the funeral? And so we spoke about all the different things about when do you attend a funeral, especially for children, and what are the rules of that. And we teach about that in our 16-hour course. We may not have covered all the parts to this story, but we definitely covered a lot of the parts. And the reason I decided to go all the way this long until now was because I wanted to show you the full gamut with as many parts as I can record and remember, and I'm sure there's tons I forgot, so you can get a taste of the practical and the psychological bird's eye view of what this looks like over a few days. And it's going to keep going, right? Because big events like this, people are still going to be talking about the wounded and what is their condition, and they're going to be let out, and then there's going to be community speeches and memorials. It's just going to go on and on. And we know in these disasters have phases, and then the needs of the community and individuals change throughout those phases. So I was trying to show you an inside view of what Monday looked like for me from 10:15 till 2 p.m. and from 2:30 p.m. until 1:30 a.m. when I went to sleep Monday night. And then again Tuesday, and then again Wednesday, I got more calls. Who can help this person? They were on the bus. Can you help me? I was on the bus, or I was next to the bus. I had more of those on Tuesday and more of those on Wednesday. And I bet you when I go home, there's going to be some more of those waiting for me now. So this is what it looks like. If you studied PFA, remember your basic 8 steps of the NCTSN, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network Psychological First Aid. You can find their course for free, I think. And it's not exactly what we teach because we adapt it to our sorts of scenarios, but you can learn it there. But that's very brief and oversimplified. You want to learn it really well, take our 16-hour course, get on our mailing list on our website, psychotraumaunit.com. There's going to be a pop-up on psychotraumaunit.com, and make sure to subscribe to the mailing list so you can hear about new courses. So we did a lot of basic 8-step psychological first aid of the NCTSN. We did different components of Model Maaseh, the 6 C's model of Dr. Moshe Farhi. We worked with some very dissociative people, lethargic people, confused people, people who can barely move and barely talk, people who can barely stand and walk. We did a lot of practical assistance, practical aid, getting people on the phone with their loved ones, getting them out of the sun, etc., etc. I hope this was a valuable learning opportunity, and I hope you got a lot out of this, because it's not every day you have such a big, impactful mass casualty. And it's definitely not every time that I've been to one of these events that I go and record it in real time throughout the day and then try to convey it later on. And I want to also say a disclaimer that I changed a lot of identifying details so that you're not going to know any of the people that we spoke about. No one should come to me and complain. I tried to protect everybody's identity, but I wanted you to really understand what does it look like, what can be your role in it, what are all the different considerations, whether it's where to park your car and to remember to drink and eat, to having a buddy, to how people come out of the woodworks and out of closets hours later, to what interventions we did with them, to how do we work with first responders, to how did I express my emotions later on. I tried to really cover a lot of bases, and these touch a lot of topics in our course. In fact, I might even make this mandatory for people in the course to watch. Anyhow, I'm okay, and I gotta get home because this is a long time. I gotta get back, get ready for Shabbat. I had a lot of loved ones and wonderful people that reached out to me, wanted to see how I'm doing. They offered me to go out for coffee. I really don't think I was so traumatized this time. I had a lot of emotion. I cried it out throughout the day, and I cried it out again the next night as well. I think for me, one of the unique things in my role here was that I was so busy and running so much from person to person to person, part of the scene to part of the scene, transport to transport to transport. The tempo was so fast that it was almost like I felt surreal. Like, was I even there? Did it really even happen? Like, that was hard for me to grasp. And that's why I needed my doctor friend to tell me the details and kind of listen to myself record it and play this over and share it, so that I was like, yes, I was there. This is what happened. This was the beginning. This is the middle. This is the end. And now that I grasp it, I can kind of put it away. Thank you guys so much. Thank you to Yisrael very, very much. He was one of my favorite students and upcoming big superstar therapist and PFA provider. Thank you, Yisrael, for your time. Thank you, everyone watching this, for your time. We should hear good news. If you want to learn about PFA, get in touch with me via email at the website on the contact page, psychotraumaunit.com. Thank you so much. Talk to you later.